API management for developers. Managing APIs can be fairly complex when you look at it in a very wide idea of what API management actually means. And to talk a little bit about what it takes and how wide it actually can be, today we have Mike Admundsen with us. Hey, Mike, how are you doing? Thanks for joining.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah. Today we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to really successfully manage your APIs, and not so much in the narrow technical sense, but more, let's say, in a little bit wider way. When you hear API management, what do you have in your head?
Well, see, that's the challenge. As you sort of alluded to, it's a huge. We talk about life cycle, right? And that's all the way from discovery. I talk about discovering that you need an API, or that you have an API, or that you want an API, through design and adoption and promotion and maintenance. I often talk about how the work of APIs, the bulk of it is while it's in production, not before production. And then the whole idea of eventually you might need to deprecate it. There's an awful lot going on, and this touches on social issues, technical issues. It's a really, really wide range of stuff. So it's a super challenging thing. And I find I learn an awful lot from others when I sort of pay attention to these things. For example, I've been doing this for decades. I don't want to say how many, but when did you start working on APIs? What does API mean to you?
Well, I've been working on this for decades as well, I think. I've been pulled into this when XML came to be. So that was a little while ago.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
I've been doing it for a long time. And I would say the same thing is true for me that you said. It's when you look at what others are doing, you can learn a lot. And I think one of the really reassuring things nowadays is that you're not the first trying this, right? There are many others doing this.
Exactly right.
So learning from
right.
others, I think, trying to learn from the wisdom of the API crowds, I think that could be a really good idea. So in your experience, what have you seen where things sometimes go wrong? Are there typical things where you see that organizations are struggling a little bit more than they maybe would have to?
Yeah, and it goes right along with what you said before about how everybody is working on this. Often what I see are some of the similar things or same things happening quite often. Just people who just have sort of blind spots in their design. They didn't really think about the fact that the technology might change, or that this API might last this long, or that these many people would use the API, or that the team would get changed. So there are a lot of these kinds of things that come up, or just not being able to keep up with the pace of what's going on. You release an API, and a year or two later, technologies and patterns change so much that you're kind of behind the eight ball again. We call that technical debt or something like that. There's lots of stuff. What are some of the things that you think of when you think of sort of unrealized potential or challenges that people don't really think about when they get into this?
Yeah, I'd say it's similar to your experiences. And like you said, right, like sometimes it's something like API lifecycle management comes up all the time, where people kind of regret that they didn't think about this earlier. And you basically, all you can do is like, well, it's too late now. Well, and you can still do things, right? But this is one of the things where, had you thought of it a little earlier, your life would be much easier now. And I think that's just one of the things that I've seen over and over again, where if you had a little bit better lay of the land, so to speak, it might help you to just progress in a little bit more coordinated way. And since we've both seen that a fair bit, one of the things that we are planning for 2024 is to run some workshops around that, right? And the workshops will be called API Management for Developers. And the idea was that we would try to make sure that people are having fewer of those blind spots, and that you don't kind of get to these, if I had only known earlier moments, right, on your API journey.
Yeah, exactly. Helping people actually, I think a big part of this, one of the things I mention very often is, before you get started, let's figure out just exactly where you are on the map. Get some assessment on your existing practices. It's hard to improve something you don't measure. It's hard to measure something you don't know exists. It's hard to figure out what exists if you don't take some time to kind of look around and, figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your culture's like, what you can do. So I think this is a big part of any good sort of workshop experience is also not just, getting a collection of steps that somebody else did and trying to apply those same steps, but actually getting an assessment on where you are, right?
Yeah, where you are, and also hopefully one that covers all the necessary areas. So what we've tried to do is to come up with the 4 areas that we will focus on during that workshop, and then try to make sure that for all of those 4 areas we talk about why it matters, what to do in that area, and also talk a little bit about potential risks, right? It's like, what happens if
Right.
you ignore that? And what are the
Yes.
things sometimes, right? Like, I think you and I, we probably have a lot of experience to speak from in terms of, well, we've seen that happening and that didn't end well. And so I think like discussing those things, and both in terms of the patterns we've seen and also in terms of where the workshop participants are, hopefully will get people a little bit better idea of where they are and then where they want to go. So let's talk a little bit, just very briefly, about those 4 areas that we have. And the first one that we have is called strategy and business alignment. And I think that's hopefully an easy one to cover. Let's see. What do you say what we're talking about there?
Yeah, I mean it's one that I have seen a lot of people asking about. It's sort of like this notion of what is the model that you're using? How do you determine whether or not this API is actually going to contribute in some way to the bottom line, to the organization? How do team structures affect the way you end up creating your APIs? And risk assessment. How much risk are we getting into? So there's all these things about it's not just what I want, it's what I need, and it's what might happen if I'm not paying attention. So there's a lot of this. That's why it's called strategy as well as alignment. And I think that leads to one of the next big ones, which is figuring out what is your design and your development process and your ongoing process. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that whole sort of product design idea.
Yeah, so the second area that we have is called product design, development, and management. And I think this is actually a little bit more like let's say, the little bit narrower view of API management sometimes, right? When it's really about how do I design
Yeah.
APIs, how do I develop them, development practices, do I have a platform to work with, how do I manage them on a technical level? And that's something that, of course, is important to do, but it's one of those areas where I'd say, historically speaking, this is always an area where people at least were aware of the fact that, yeah, we probably need to figure out, how we design and develop and manage APIs, right? This is, I think, how we often actually started those conversations. And the third one that we will also talk about it's a little bit newer, I would say, right? It's about governance and platform. I think it's this whole area of scaling the practice a little bit more, right? It's going
Right.
from having individual APIs to having hopefully a lot of them, and scaling the practices alongside. So what would you say is the most important part in that third area that we have?
Yeah, I think that's where the word that people don't like, the word governance, kind of comes into the picture. But
Very true.
it has a lot to do with that notion of platform, what you typically have been calling API landscapes for quite a while as well. It's this notion of do you have this central control, or do you have this distributed control? Where do the ideas come from? What are the guidelines, the guardrails, and things like that? A well-designed governance model makes it possible for people to think creatively and act on their own. A weak model means that somebody from the top always has to tell you what to do. So figuring out where you are on that sort of slider, so to speak, I think is really, really important, because that really determines that sort of fourth step, which is this notion of with the products that you get and the platform that you're working with and how you engage people, right? And I think you've done a lot on that as well, right?
Yeah, so that fourth area is called product and platform marketing. And it's a little bit, maybe for some people, they might wonder, what does marketing have to do here? But in my mind, actually, when I talk to organizations, and often I ask them, what do you do to make your APIs better known, to make your API platform better known? How do you increase usage of your APIs,
Yeah.
right? In a lot of
Yeah.
cases, there's still this, well, build it and they will come mentality. And that's just not very effective in the end. I mean, you
Yeah.
can do that, but in many cases, it's probably a much better idea to say, well, since I'm investing in building the APIs, I should probably also invest at least a little bit in actually helping people to know about them, to understand how to use them, to actually use them, right? All these kind of things. And that is very different depending on whether you have external or internal APIs, what the consumers kind of look like that you're looking for. But at least thinking about that consumption, how do I increase consumption of the APIs, right? I think that is something that is important and that
Yeah.
not always people pay enough attention to.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about reuse. When I talk about reuse, when I'm doing this kind of work, I put the RE sort of in parentheses. Use is really, really important. Then you can get to reuse. You know, and I think this all kind of boils down to, we talked about how wide a space this is. This is all trying to figure out what it is you're trying to do. What are you trying to achieve? How can you achieve it? How have others contributed to that space in some time? So it's a kind of a figure it out kind of mentality, I think, more than anything else. And I think you've kind of got some bullets there about what the way we think about how we're going to figure things out, right?
Yeah, so that I think is the main goal of that workshop, will be to figure things out, right? Figure out where you are. So in that whole landscape of the four things we just talked about, where you are have you thought of everything? Have you maybe forgotten certain things? And also figure out, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Not everybody has the same ideas around APIs, I would say. Sometimes there's a very big difference between, are you more focused on private or internal APIs, or more partner and public external APIs, right? So these are differences. Where do you want to go? Where do you see your goals? Also, I would say, and that I mean, you've also done similar workshops already, right? And just figuring out what's holding you back right now.
Yeah.
I think that also can be very enlightening, right? Where people, like, if you ask them, well, now that we've kind of assessed a little bit how you scale on all these things, like, where's the biggest pain for you right now?
Yeah, and I think not just always the biggest pain, but also the biggest payback. Often what I talk about is, if
pain and potential, yes,
right. If you make just a few changes right now, you can really shore up a weakness, or you can really take advantage of a strength within the next 90 days. Is one of the ways I always talk about it. These other ones may take a little bit longer. You may need to have a longer view of things. So it's what do you focus on next? What do you do right now? What do you focus on next? Figuring out how to complete the next step. Like, what tools do I need? Do I just need a little bit of training, a little bit of tooling, a little bit of change in my model, a little bit more documentation, and maybe you can sort of hit that next level. So all of this, it turns out, is not an end, right? It doesn't just, like, if I just finish these 5 items, then I'm done. I can go to the beach for another year or two, right?
Ideally, this whole process of figuring out where you are, where you want to go, what's holding you back, what to work on next, how to best work on that next, right? That is really something that should just be an iterative process. And in my mind, it will actually never stop, because also you have new technologies coming in, you have cool new things coming in, you have maybe new business opportunities coming towards you. So things will always keep changing, and you have to keep adjusting to it. And I think having this iterative process it's a lot to deal with. But having some pointers, I think, and having some help along the way, I would hope, that's something that really makes people a little bit more confident that they can actually navigate that.
Yeah, you're not alone, right? That's really the point of all of this. There's been lots of people who walk this path, lots of people who are willing to share. And I think that's what I end up spending most of my time doing with organizations, sharing what I've learned from others and giving you a chance to figure out, like you said, where you are, where you're going next. And that's why I enjoy what I'm doing.
You're not alone. Yeah, that's very true. So it's kind of like a self-help group for API people.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe we need a 12-step program.
Yeah, the 12. Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that. The 12 steps to API perfection. That'll be the 2025 workshop.
Okay. We'll work on that next. right.
Yeah, we'll work on that next. But yeah, so I am excited about this because it
Yes.
seems to me that there's so much potential that is in those organizations who are doing things already and are a little bit insecure in what to do next, like and then identifying potential and possibilities. And I would hope that our 12-step process or the version before that
That's
will
right.
actually
Exactly.
help them. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
And if you're curious, so for 2024, this is something that we really want to do. So we have 2 lined up right now, which are listed from the description. They're both in April in London and in Mainz in Germany. And I hope we'll have more of these. We'll see. Thanks so much for joining, Mike.
You bet.
And thanks everybody for watching. If you found this interesting, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you find the whole idea interesting, once again, we'll publish more workshop dates once we know about them. For now, we have 2 in April 2024. And with that, we're done for today. Thanks a lot for watching and keep getting APIs to work. Bye, everybody.
So long.